All right, welcome back to the Canadian Gun Vault. This week's subject of discussion for Behind the Vault Door will be debunking some of the myths regarding self-defense here in Canada involving a firearm. For those of you that have been watching the social media lately, it's been a hot topic. It's been circulating quite a bit. We've seen a lot of people in the news that have been charged with using a firearm to defend their lives here in Canada. And certainly throughout the course of my career as a police officer, I was asked quite frequently, is it okay? Can you use a firearm to defend your life? Is there even any self-defense law here in Canada? And to those people, I would say this. Can you use a firearm to defend your life here in Canada? Yes. Is it a good idea? Probably not. Generally speaking, within the firearm community, it's a common belief that using a firearm to defend your life here in Canada as a homeowner will land you a one-way ticket to an $80,000 legal fee and probably a trip to jail. Quite honestly, it's a pretty serious matter, but the truth is that it's one that's often laughed about within the firearm community. Here in Canada, the laws are different. In the U.S., obviously things are a little bit more firearm friendly. You've got people down there that truly believe that you can use a firearm to defend your life, and it's enshrined, of course, in their constitution that they have the right to bear arms. But even amongst the judicial community, there's much more widespread belief that that's an acceptable phenomenon, that to use a firearm to defend your life, especially in your own home. I mean, we have things like castle doctrine and stand your ground precedent that's been set, whereby if an intruder breaks into your home, that you as a homeowner have the right to feel safe in your home, and that by entering your home, they violated that. And just by being there, they are at a position of great disadvantage when it comes to being injured within your home. And certainly in Canada, that is not the case. We, of course, here at the Canadian Gun Vault don't endorse loading firearms and shooting at people. However, I will say this, that everybody's different. And should you find yourself in a situation where somebody breaks into your home, and you make the decision to load a firearm because you feel your life or your family's lives are being threatened, should you decide to go load your firearm, and right out of the gate, I will tell you, you're putting yourself at a position of great disadvantage. One, make sure your firearms are stored properly. We actively encourage everyone out there who owns firearms legally to store their firearms properly. And that means here in Canada that the firearms are kept separate from the ammunition and locked up. And I know that some of our American listeners are probably shaking their heads right now and saying, what's the point? But the truth is that's the way it is in Canada, and certainly it helps us avoid a lot of problems and a lot of accidents. And if you should decide to load your firearm, if you're unfortunate enough to be placed in a position where somebody has broken into your home, if you decide to make that decision, first thing I will tell you to do is not go downstairs looking for the intruder. That is the single largest mistake that people make here in Canada. That's the one that I certainly have heard the most talk about. When you do that, when you load a firearm and decide to go down the stairs, actively seeking out the potential threat, you put yourself in a position where if anything goes wrong and somebody gets hurt, any Crown attorney worth their salt will clearly illustrate in a courtroom that you were part of the problem, that you went down there looking for a confrontation, and it was because of your presence on the lower level of your home that shooting occurred and somebody was hurt. So don't do that. That would be my best advice to you. My second best advice to you would be this. Get a hold of a phone. Call the police. Get the people on site as quickly as possible that are trained, certified, and equipped to deal with that kind of threat. And then you're going to want to lock yourself as far away, right, from that threat as possible. Put as many locked doors between you and the potential threat as you can. That's if you can't exit the home and leave the situation entirely, because that's the best course of action. And I know there are people out there that would argue that that's really not a good way to look at things. But here in Canada, the way the current laws are and the way the system currently exists, you would want to put as many locked doors between you and the potential threat as possible. Right? And if you do that and you make the announcement, I have a gun. It's loaded. I know how to use it. I've called the police. Get out of my house now. If you do that, you will resolve 99.9% of your problems. Because I really don't believe that there are many police officers out there that will fault you in this day and age for accessing your firearms and locking yourself in a room and calling the police when someone enters your home. If you do those things, you will avoid most of the troubles connected with using a firearm to defend your life. You know, in talking about this, I quite often think of some of the laughable myths that I hear. You know, things like, well, why didn't you shoot him in the leg? You know, that's a great one. I love that. I used to hear that a lot as a police officer. You know, people would say things like, well, why didn't you shoot him in the leg or the shoulder? You know, shoot the gun out of his hand. You know, like what? Like, why didn't the cop do that? It's kind of comical. And for those people that have spent any amount of time out on the line shooting at a two-dimensional target that isn't moving quickly and trying to kill you, I can tell you that it's just not a realistic expectation of anyone. Even trained personnel miss 6 times out of 8 when placed in terrifically stressful situations like that. And you factor in, you know, weapons and darkness, you know, environmental factors, you know, the fact that your eyes actually physically flatten, you know, and you get that tunnel vision where you lose about 60% of your field of view, it becomes very hard. And it's very unfortunate that many members of the general public feel like, you know, police should be able to do those sorts of things. I can tell you that a citizen who may or may not be as well trained as a police officer can't be expected to do that either. And then, of course, there's the, you know, how many times can you shoot, you know, conversation. In policing, it was always you shoot until the threat stops. And I think if you're able to justify shooting 1 round, you may be very easily able to justify shooting, you know, many more than that. But don't find yourself in a position, and this is one that I heard about a long time ago in policing. There was a gentleman who had an intruder who had broken into his home with a firearm. So the homeowner had accessed his and shot the intruder as he was entering in his bedroom. And I think that at that point, that gentleman would have been just fine, you know, defending his position. That he was reasonable in doing what he did. However, he took it one step further and decided to finish off the intruder in a very action movie-like fashion, and found himself facing manslaughter charges and being convicted and spending a decade plus in prison. I think most people would like to avoid that. I certainly don't want that for anybody, and I would ask that most people stay away from that sort of practice. If we could have perhaps some changes made to the charter and have some of these issues addressed there, we might be further along in the process. Anyway, that's about all the time we have here for tonight's episode of the Canadian Gun Vaults, Behind the Vault Door. We hope you've enjoyed listening, and have a great night.